So welcome everyone to tonight's seminar hosted by the Affordable Housing Challenge Project. For accessibility purposes, you'll note that we have a live closed caption option that you can enable in the bottom right hand of your screen, should you need it. So if you go down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see CC live transcript. I'm Sinead Petrasek. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto. I have also been working as a research assistant to support the capacity building of the Kensington Market Community Land Trust. I am so delighted for you to hear the story of the Land Trust thus far. So thank you all for being here tonight. For those that aren't familiar with the Affordable Housing Challenge Project, it is an initiative based in the University of Toronto's School of Cities, and it's meant to foster interdisciplinary research on housing across the university's many departments and in collaboration with the broader Toronto community. So these seminars are a significant part of that collaboration. And I would also like to acknowledge the support of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and the Community Housing Transformation Centre in making this possible. There are, of course, numerous other people who have supported the efforts of the Land Trust, and those people will be mentioned in the presentations you'll hear. People and organizations, I should say. So a core part of the Affordable Housing Challenge Project is the commitment to housing justice. And that means recognizing that housing has long been used as a tool to divide and oppress, and that housing is currently not accessible to everyone due to both costs and discrimination. And also that the current housing crisis has disproportionate negative impacts on marginalized people who need it most. And it's truly imperative at this moment that we link the struggle for housing justice to ongoing processes of settler colonialism that structure and underpin life, from these Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, to the Wet'suwet'en in the West, who call for solidarity in defending their land as we speak tonight. Something that Dominique Russell, who you will hear from, has said about the Land Trust as a model is that the collective can really do what individuals alone cannot do. And this statement resonates at multiple scales in our present moment. Kensington Market, of course, is a legendary destination, but it is also a place where people live, and we must not lose sight of that. And I think tonight we're going to be returning to that over and over. So let me introduce our speakers, and then I will hand it over to each of them for 10 minutes before we open up to questions. So as usual, you can put your questions in the chat and I will keep track of them so that we can pose them to the speakers at the end of the presentations. So our first we'll hear from Dominique Russell. Dominique is a writer, activist, scholar, and teacher. She founded Friends of Kensington Market in 2013 and is also one of the founders of the Kensington Market Community Land Trust and currently a co-chair of the board with Kevin Barrett. She is the author of Instructions for Dreamers from Swimmers Group, Kensington, I Remember from Russell Creek Press, and the editor of Rape in Art Cinema, published by Bloomsbury. Dominique will be speaking about neighborhood organizing and lessons learned. And then we will hear from Chiyi, who is an urban planner and community organizer raised in Vancouver on unceded Coast Salish lands and waters in the translation between places and culture. She's currently the development manager of the Kensington Market Community Land Trust, and she also organizes with Friends of Chinatown, Toronto, which is also currently exploring a community land trust as an anti-displacement strategy for racial and economic justice. Chiyi will speak about buying the building at 54 Kensington Avenue. And then we'll also hear resident perspectives and discuss the impacts of tenant organizing with Eric Jensen, who is a board member and resident, a longtime resident of Kensington Market, who has been a bartender, builder, and frequent background contributor to many neighborhood endeavors. He presently helps deliver services to the marginalized and underhoused with St. Stephen's Community House. And we'll also hear from Sydney Creighton. Sid is a former administrator at both St. Michael's Hospital and Wellesley Hospital, with a background in commercial real estate marketing, advertising, and film distribution. So I will now hand it over to Dominique.
Thanks, Sinead, and welcome everyone. Gosh, there's so many people. I've never been with so many people on Zoom. So I don't know if we can see the first slide of mine, Sean. Yes, thank you. So the first thing I should tell you, I imagine that most of you know, but Kensington Market is, of course, and we can move to the second and third slide. So Kensington Market is historically, we sometimes think of it as Toronto's old quarter, and it's the place we're very grateful to the initial Jewish market, that people who came in and sort of opened up storefronts in their houses and broke with the grid structure of Toronto, and then the waves of immigration that have marked this place: Portuguese, Latin American, Hungarian, and Chinese, and the traces that are left there. Traditionally, Kensington is a place to start, and there is a sense that we want to preserve that and pass it on. So in talking about the buying of 54-56, I'm tempted to go right back to the very first demonstration. You can move to the number 4 and 5 photos to go back to our very first demonstration and the founding of Friends of Kensington Market, because the founding of the idea for the land trust is really closely intertwined with the anti-gentrification fight that started in or didn't start, but was consolidated with Friends of Kensington Market. So there's just some images of our first of Friends of Kensington Market's initial battles, as it were. And then in the next slide, there's an image of Dave Pincus, who was a community elder and an activist. And, he was very important to me personally in both the founding of Friends of Kensington Market and the initial work for the land trust. And when it started, he said to me, it's really important. You can fight and fight, but eventually you'll lose. You'll win some, but you'll lose some. So it's really important to have the other element of what are you going to build? And I used to go and see Dave Pincus before every community event, and he passed away just last year, and he's sorely missed. So I won't go right back to the beginning. I will start, if we move to the next slide, I'll just go back 4 years to a previous development and tenant battle. So this began with a blood-chilling email about a developer that had bought up numerous properties on Kensington Ave. And they bought at fire sale prices and immediately began to evict tenants. And the Friends of Kensington board at that point understood that in order to sort of stop development in its tracks, that is, to preserve that part of the market, it was going to be really important for us to shore up the tenants, both with legal funding and support. We had an amazing lawyer at that point, Ian Flett, who helped us organize a meeting that brought together legal resources, the city, the province, all the resources that we could find to help the tenants of 38 Kensington Place. So we fought hard in that battle, and we lost some, we won some, but we didn't manage to keep most of the tenants in their place at 38 Kensington Place, which eventually turned into a ghost hotel. There is one tenant who stayed. If you can go to the next photo. So we understood what the stakes were when we learned on January 1st that the tenants of 5456 had been threatened with eviction. We understood that we needed to get the resources very quickly to the tenants. So on January 14th, we had a meeting with city bureaucrats, Mike Layton's office, Jessica Bell's office, the Kensington Bellwoods Legal Clinic, and the neighborhood to try and shore up the tenants and try and help them stay in their homes. Friends of Kensington Market had undertaken a broad campaign against Airbnb, or I should say for the regulation of short-term rentals. So here you can see an image of our requiem for rental housing. So we understood the stakes. We knew that what was coming was, in all likelihood, a ghost hotel. If we could go to the next image. So what is the, you can see in our description of one of our events, the idea of the Airbnb in particular, but ghost hotels, that whole buildings given over to short-term rentals, not home sharing, but in fact, what was precipitating and part of what is part of the housing crisis, which is people buying up buildings in order to rent them out short term rather than the home sharing, which we've always seen in Kensington Market. Friends of Kensington Market had undertaken a broad campaign to try and get some regulations around this. And we were very fortunate at the time to have a community organizer, Colin Davidson, who volunteered with us to help us with helping shore up the tenants of 5456. And Eric can say more about this from the tenant's perspective. But I think it was important that we had the neighborhood behind this fight. So an understanding that it wasn't just the tenants of a particular building or tenants in general in the neighborhood, but that the neighborhood itself was really behind. It's important I want to mention that in the fight for 38 Kensington Place, there was in fact there was a tenant, or rather there was a neighborhood phone line so that the sort of a phone tree. So if tenants felt that they were under threat, that they could call homeowners, store owners, people in the neighborhood could call, and they would come and witness what might be threatening to the tenants. So there was a real sense of neighborhood solidarity around the tenant fights. And I want to tell a little story of, because it talks to the commitment of our city councillor. We found out that there was going to be a meeting between the tenants of 5456, or the tenants were called to a meeting with their new landlord. And it was really important that we had a flyer prepared, Mike's office prepared a flyer so that the tenants understood that they didn't have to go to that meeting and that, what their rights were. And it was really key to get those in the mailboxes. And it was actually, in the end, through a series of unfortunate events or fortunate events, it was actually Mike Layton that went and delivered those in the evening and door knocked. So the commitment from the city councillor is important to note there. If we could go to the next slide. Sorry, and the next one, that's the Ghost Hotel campaign. So the information meeting, and sorry, moving on. So this is actually a photograph that Mike Layton took on a rainy Good Friday. We were standing outside where the meeting was going to take place. There was Mike Layton, there was the head of the BIA, there was a group of neighbors who stood in the rain for what turned out to be a very short meeting, and Eric and Sid might tell more about that. But so there was this sense of the importance of this building in terms of the battle that it presented. It's a key location, but it was just really important to keep the neighbors in their place. And the fabric of Kensington Market is really, to a large extent, the people that make it. And I've elaborated on this part of the story because I can't emphasize enough that the tenants were key, that the tenant organizing was key, neighborhood organizing was key to being able to buy the building. We would never have been able to buy this building if the tenants hadn't stood their ground, and it's very difficult. So I want to salute all of those who are fighting for their homes. When I think about buying 5456, it seems like a miracle, but in fact, there was a lot of groundwork in making that miracle happen. So getting the land trust off the ground, which was no mean feat. You had to convince the neighbors that this was the direction to take, that we had won against Walmart and it was time to do this building. Getting from an idea to a working group to a board that was an elected board. So all of that work happened in the background. If we could, there's another image. That's our soft launch several years ago. Our links with the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust and their work on getting, and I don't have the exact name of the bylaw that was created, but the rooming house, essentially the preservation of rooming houses, that they had sort of laid some tracks in terms of the city considering affordable housing, not just in terms of building and giving money to developers to build, but also to preserve and to keep people in their homes and to ensure the affordability of those buildings. The support of the School of Cities and the Affordable Housing Project, which allowed us, when the time came, to hire Chiyi, because we wouldn't have been able to do it as a volunteer board. We wouldn't have been able to do the acquisition. And you'll see from her presentation just how tight the timeline was on that. It's also the support of our counselors. So I talked about the tenant part of organizing and having the support of Mike Layton and his commitment to that. But then on the other end, understanding what the land trust was, understanding the importance of preserving Kensington Market through this generally, but this specific instrument to allow us to keep a piece of the market and people in the market and the affordability of the market and how important that was. We also had, and I think this is important, we had a sort of a map of what our dream was, what it was we were hoping for. We knew which buildings might come up for sale. We had a sense of where they were in their importance. So we had a real estate agent who was looking at what was coming up for sale. And so when 5456 came up for sale, we had a sense of how important it would be to get it. Unfortunately, when we found out that it was for sale, there was, we were too late. There was a deal in the works. And miraculously, that deal fell through. I say miraculously, but in actual fact, our activism made this building less attractive for people to buy. It made it sellable because it wasn't, there was tenants standing in the way, there was a neighborhood standing in the way. They couldn't just easily turn this into a hotel or a ghost hotel. The plan really failed on the basis of the activism. So the deal didn't go through and we had an opening. What I didn't know, and maybe you didn't know this, I had no idea, but in order to even enter into a conversation about putting an offer on a building to be taken seriously, you actually have to have quite a large sum of money to open that. And so I found out on a Saturday that the building that the offer had fallen through and the building was still for sale. And we needed to get approximately 300,000 in order to put an offer in. And so I thought, okay, how do we do this? We maybe can get 30 neighbors to loan us 10,000 and all the different ways that we had to do this. And in actual fact, we were extraordinarily fortunate in having a benefactor who loaned us that money on a short term and then eventually on a long term basis. So I'm not sure what my next slide is, but maybe we can, okay. So I'll let Chiyi tell the rest of the story in its details, and Sid and Eric will be able to fill us in terms of what that looked like from the tenant perspective. But when we look at how this all came together, there's this element of luck. You know, there was luck, there was timing, but there also was all this work that seemed, you know, networking and talking to people and building links with other organizations and organizing. Although Kensington, you know, is a really special neighborhood, it's undeniably a special neighborhood, and people know each other, so it's like a village with all its complications of living in a village, but it is like a village. But what Friends of Kensington Market did was bring people from different parts of the neighborhood into contact, so that we knew each other so much more. And so all of that groundwork meant that when the opportunity came, we were ready and we were able to rely on so many people to help us, because I can't stress enough about how much Parkdale School of Cities, various agents that helped us do this, the city, Mike Layton, but the idea of organizing your neighborhood, I think, is really key. All of us were more or less exposed to the housing crisis, but we're all exposed to the loss of our neighbors, and all of us can have a role to play in a land trust, in a neighborhood land trust. And I think often we can separate each other between the tenants and the homeowners. And in the case of Kensington, we're really lucky that there was this unity that brought us here. So I'm not sure how long I spoke, but.
Thank you, Dominique. Now I'll hand it over to Chiyi to hear about the acquisition of 54 Kensington Ave.
So hi, I am Chiyi. Sean will share my slides in a brief moment. My pronouns are she and her. I'm very new to Toronto, and I'm also just like a very new human in the context of the others who have known Toronto and known Kensington Market for a long time. And so the core goal of my slides is to convey a sense of, if we could do it, you can do it too. And especially if I could do it. Just to emphasize, I am a fresh grad. I am 20 some years old, and I was mentored, and I had all of these phone numbers to call in order to actually complete the motions of buying this building. But truly, like, I learned this on the fly. And so if I could, like, if we can just like have a to-do list and organize ourselves and figure it out together, truly you can too. So my slides are called Actually Buying the Building, and we can progress to the next one, which will clearly show you the minute details of why Dominique says that every single person who joined into this incredible story of how this acquisition actually happened was completely critical. If any one of these lines in this table was not in there, this deal would not have happened. Whether it's the $4,000 line you see on the second row, or if it's the $3 million line that you see on the fourth row. Like, literally every single one of this was critical at the time that it entered the conversation. And to just really make the point about how short of a time frame we were working on, you know, never bought a building at like this with anyone before, did not know, but there's a thing called a due diligence period. And for the most part, in a really fast real estate market like the downtown Toronto core, you only have 30 days to figure your stuff out. You basically put your deposit down, and then you have 30 days to actually go around, get engineers to tell you whether this is a good idea, get an architect or a planner to tell you whether this is a good idea, get a lawyer to tell you whether there's anything sketchy in the property titles. And all of these consultants have, like, they take 2 weeks to report back to you. And then now you only have 1 week to go tell a bank whether you think this is a good idea and then convince them that it's a good idea to give you the money to do it. So that's, like, in short, what it feels like to buy a building. And this was very overwhelming, but somehow we did it, which makes it even more miraculous. So we had $300K as a neighborly loan, let's say, which was already somewhat of a miracle, in order to have this conversation. And then the Affordable Housing Challenge Project, who is not just the host of this webinar, but also this, like, incredibly, like, community-minded research unit that has, like, a powerhouse of human people by the name of Alan Walks and Susanna Bunce and Sinead, who's hosting this with us, and Cooney, who will not show his face, who all, like, campaigned for me to be able to join the project. And I have to tell you, I was finishing my master's thesis presentations at the time, and I was, like, on the side also trying to buy this building. The more I talk about it now, the more I don't know how we actually did it. So then after that, very quickly, we then successfully applied for a grant, which also amazingly understood the urgency of what we were trying to do. And they responded very quickly. And this is a national grant. The Community Housing Transformation Center is accessible to all of you, no matter where you are in Canada. And they immediately issued a grant for us to be able to continue paying me for my organizing time, but also for a couple other consultants that we needed to check in with. So then we came to a time where the city council was also preparing to decide whether or not they could contribute to this. And the rest of the deal completely hinges on the prospect that maybe the city of Toronto, through Mike Layton's office's advocacy, and then also the incredibly clever work that happened between the legal team and the housing secretariat in a very short time frame, was able to mobilize Section 37 funds and think very carefully through whether or not this would be a deal that was viable that way. And then somehow that also unanimously passed in City Council on April 7th. And then after that, I realized, oh my God, we are still short $250. Even though the whole while through, like right from the beginning of April, I had already been talking to multiple banks to say, okay, I know roughly we need to borrow somewhere between $3 million to $3.2 million as a mortgage. I realized after all of that, we were still $250K short between paying for the immediate repairs that this very old 100-some-year-old building definitely needs, and the actual purchase price, and paying for land transfer taxes and all of these things. So, you know, if a building says that it's like $5 million, it's never just $5 million. There's also a lesson that I had to learn. It's like, oh, there's also these other soft costs and hard costs. And there's a word called a pro forma, which is really just an Excel sheet that says, like, this is how much things cost, and this is how much you can get for various sums of money. So in the end, this is the summary of what we were able to get. And I'm happy to answer questions about any of these in detail if you're interested. So next slide. I only have 2 more slides. The next slide is to answer the many questions I'm sure you all have about what exactly constitutes affordable housing in this particular case. So for 54 Kensington, as per our agreement with the City of Toronto, the building's residential rents must average no more than 80% of Toronto's average market rents. So this was the previous definition of affordable housing until very recently. And actually, the reason why this building was so important to preserve was that we didn't actually have to change the rents for that to be the case. The rents were already at an average of less than 80% of Toronto's average market rents. So because some folks have been living here for decades and decades in this building, those residential rents right now range from $455 a month to $1,500 a month, and right in the heart of Kensington Market, which, if you've tried to look for housing in downtown Toronto, you know is unheard of. And so the third point, I can't believe I have to say, but it does differentiate us from other property owners, unfortunately, in the downtown core, which is that rents cannot increase beyond provincial guidelines, and that they continue to meet this affordability standard over the 99 years in order for our loan from the City of Toronto for $3 million to be forgiven. So it's that essentially it becomes a grant. And I also can't believe I need to explicitly clarify this, but we will never evict someone. And if we are successful, there will be no vacancies in this building so long as everybody chooses to stay. And if they choose to stay, then we will facilitate that. And some interesting other things beyond just the provision of affordable housing. When you have community controlled buildings, you get to do fun things and you get to think together about what to do with the budget. So one thing we knew from the outset was we knew of tenants that were interested in the custodial work. So we never considered, getting that as part of our property management package. We maintained and dedicated a portion of our maintenance budget to hire tenants directly to do that work. That's just one of many different possible scenarios. And then what this also allows us to do now is a lot of tenant engagement work. And we created a new membership class for the Community Land Trust in this past AGM, because we now have resident members. We previously just had community members like Sue, who lives in Kensington Market and whose house we are in now, calling in from now. And then supporter members like me who don't live in Kensington Market, but I get to participate in the Land Trust activities. Right now, if everybody could take like less than a minute and go to kmclt.ca and sign up to be a member, that would make Dominique very, very happy. And then the last is that what this lets us do is have board representation for the tenants themselves so that they can govern the outcome of their building, but also more than just their building, what future work the Land Trust should do. So we have Eric and Sid with us who will speak after me much more eloquently. That's what I mean by affordable housing and more. So I'll go to my last slide. This is a bit more detail that I think the policy wonks among us are interested in here tonight, is that besides just the $3 million grant from the City of Toronto, we also, from what we know, was the first precedent of in the City of Toronto context, at least, where we were able to waive the municipal and school taxes on affordable housing units in this project. And what the reason why that we had previously thought that was impossible was that in Parkdale's experience, and shout out to Parkdale again and again and again, because truly without them, we would not have known what we were doing, or at least I would not have known what I was doing. We were exempted from this definition of affordable rental housing units that it had to be new units for it to meet the definition of affordable housing in the municipal housing facility bylaw as it existed. And so there was no sort of like rationale for the act of preserving existing affordable units, even though our city continues to hemorrhage them while we continue to make deals with developers on a piece by piece basis, right? For like 3 units here and 10 units there that are only affordable for 20 years, for 40 years, depending on what your community benefits agreement with these projects are. We're adding these slivers of affordable housing for a finite temporal piece of time while we are hemorrhaging so many permanent pieces of housing. And so that's why like acquiring and protecting existing housing stock is like affordable housing stock is more important, if not equally important, as just being a supply side, what I like to call supply side urbanism bro in the housing conversation. All right, thank you so much. And then I think I have one last slide and then I'll hand it to Eric. So I completely agree with Dominique, and I'm just going to emphasize some of our critical factors for success. We still need to think more about this, but right now, fresh in it from the transaction, we know for sure that the tenant and neighborhood organizing was key. We know for sure that the municipal support, which was really unique to the degree of support we got, not just financially, but also just like interpersonally from the housing secretariat, from our local city councillor, that they were with us for the entire ride from the tenant organizing piece all the way to the transaction was huge. And then the partnerships we have with the School of Cities Affordable Housing Challenge Project, who is here with us tonight, and also with Parkdale, the fact that they were able to so generously share their knowledge, all of their research about the model that had come before, and share with us like all of the incredible history behind the model. All done in like a huge sense of solidarity, like the in-kind donation that was not outlined in terms of just human hours, and also like boards of director taking my calls while I'm like having a panic attack in the middle of the transaction. Invaluable in-kind donation. And then the last is like these grants, these community housing sector grants that exist, both large and small, whether they're a research grant or whether they're just like a revolving grant that's open for application all the time, is key for new people like me to come into the sector and learn and get trained, and add like for us to all develop this capacity as a board. But it was definitely key in this transaction. So happy to answer more questions about that, but I think you guys should hear from Eric and Sid next.
Thank you. Okay, Eric.
Okay. Well, hi everyone. I'm Eric, resident of 54. I guess the story is going to start about a few years ago on New Year's morning. The year before, as was outlined, the building had been purchased from the local legacy landlord by a property investment group. And whereas the old owners were fairly hands-off to the point of being neglectful, the new ones completely wanted to reimagine the place as the Airbnb has been spoken about. Unfortunately, I've been getting rid of us current occupants, so we started our New Year's hungover and staring fuzzily at some N14 forms that had come under our doors. Now, for most of us living here, this wasn't the first rodeo with, overexcited landlords. So we understood some of the few basics, like how these forms were notices of an application for rather than an order to vacate. And there was something we could challenge. So the first thing was networking with each other. Discuss some strategy, what everyone wanted to do in the face of this, just offer some mutual support. Some basic stuff like a private Facebook group we created so we could figure out who knew anybody or anything that might help, along with the chance to reassure each other. Anyways, it came up that we had a friend, Colin, who was mentioned earlier, who worked in housing advocacy and was able to turn us on to resources like Parkdale and Kensington was legal. Situation became a topic of discussion on community-oriented pages, on Facebook, and stuff like that. So people knew that we had a problem, and our neighborhood, being the neighborhood, was willing to help out. So I don't know much about Residential Tenancy Act regulations, let alone how grandfathering clauses work with the changes the most recent provincial government has made. But we did understand we had the right to refuse to move out. We could stand and fight this thing. From there, shortly afterwards, Friends of Kensington reached out to us with the meeting that Dominique showed us a picture of, and that was where we went up to. The first time was inviting us to take part in a community meeting at St. Stephen's about the increasing numbers of these types of evictions that have been happening. Along with this, it gave us a chance to tell our stories. One of our residents, Greg, stood up and told the assembled what was going on for us and what we were hoping to accomplish. And saw that we had the media, we had the neighborhood, and people like Mike Layton and Jessica Bell behind us. So I guess it's here that the tenants of 54 and what would become the land trust first connected. We did a few interviews with the local media in companionship with Friends of Kensington about how speculative investments been devastating communities, especially how gentrification has been impacting the economically marginalized. Meanwhile, back in the building, we had the beginnings of an organization starting to come together. The building where it is and what it signifies to the community made our struggle pretty visible amid the endless stream of renovictions. And it was time to say no more. So come April, with the assistance of and efforts of some of those mentioned earlier, we hoisted that banner that we saw the picture of around the length of the building saying no more renovictions. And I think that was pretty much a declaration to the reasonably new owners at the time that we had no intention of allowing our homes, let alone our community, to be taken out from under us. Advice that we'd received explained to the owners that they had a liability to see us rehome suitably and comparably. And this is where part of the fighting back comes in. Sorry about my phone. With fighting back and making it a real pain in the butt for them, that it's no longer a profitable venture to try to change up the neighborhood in a way it doesn't want to. They had to replace it, but to rehome us, even the Spartan qualities of this 250 square foot apartment that I live in, roughly the same price would probably not have meant leaving the neighborhood, but probably moving to another city. So they did try to offer some minimal requirements that they were obligated to as an incentive to leave voluntarily. That amount wouldn't have covered the cost of moving into a new place, let alone the rate increase, so anywhere closer than maybe Brantford would cost. There would also be the matter of several months it would take to find new employment if I'd relocated. For myself, I'd been giving up 3 part-time jobs if I'd have to leave town and having to replace them. If they've been willing to part with what I made in 6 months to cover that, I might have been interested, but anything less just wouldn't have been enough to land on my feet and stay on my feet. Of course, I never really expected them to agree anyways, but, you know, we had to, you know, make it hard. You know, we couldn't just roll over and die for them. Anyways, I never expected them to agree, but I did feel the need to expand on how great an impact this investment plan was having on mine and other people's lives. By assigning a dollar value to even the most basic considerations. And of course, some things are irreplaceable at any price, like the relationships we build as a community and the reliance we have on each other and those relationships. So despite our barely half organized selves, we were able to delay and inconvenience the owners to the point where they felt returns weren't being realized quickly enough or at the rate they'd hoped for. Without the whole building being revitalized, I'm loosely using that term, and increased scrutiny of ghost hotels that have been supplanting the rental housing in the city, it probably started to be less of an asset that they'd hoped it'd be. In any event, after nearly 2 years, rumors started that they were looking to sell. Naturally, there was some community gossip about locals who might have the means and interest to be our next landlord, but we may as well have been playing fantasy football. The common hope, though, was that somehow we'd be locally owned once more. And by that, like people we'd actually know and interact with, you know. So it was kind of mixed news for us, wondering if we go through the entire exercise again with new landlords that we didn't know. Again, someone just wanting to make the investment. She touched on the whole due diligence process there and all that. Let's see, yeah, half the neighbors had taken a settlement, or in one case, had just plain given up and walked away, leaving this place full of possessions. We lost half of our long-term tenants, and for what? Hasty makeovers of vacated units that weren't really enough to entice new tenants to stay for any length of time, at least not the prices they were charging. And in the, I guess it was maybe 16 months between when they started renting the renovated places out, it probably went through 2 tenants in each of them. Like people would take them and just couldn't, you know, there was nothing they could do to make it worth the rate they wanted to charge. Anyways, yeah, that brings us to the land trust itself. And for us living here, it was a relief. It was a return to knowing landlords as people in and of the neighborhood that cared about it and understood the balance of the Kensington ecosystem, I guess you could call it. Yeah, instead of having, you know, an out-of-town office with an ever-changing name at the other end of a phone line when you had to contact the landlord that might pass on the message to someone who might respond to it. Yeah, it just wasn't working. So there's no longer a great deal of the stress that we were facing, of course. Quite the opposite. There's a sense of optimism that our housing is going to improve in the foreseeable future. No longer just deteriorating, getting more decrepit, and a sense of stability that, you know, not having to compete with the landlord's speculative investment interests brings. So anyways, I guess that's really about all I've got to say on the subject. So thank you. So I'll pass you along to Sid, who's come along since, and that'll go. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sid. I was lucky enough to be the first tenant to come to 54 Kensington after the Land Trust bought it. I'm 74 years old. I have 2 daughters, 3 granddaughters. I was at Woodstock. I was a hippie. I used to live in Yorkville, although I was raised in Forest Hill. So I'm kind of a little bit different. But 60 years ago last month, I came to the market for the first time. It was my 14th birthday, and my parents allowed me to go downtown by myself. So the first place I went was Kensington Market. At the time, it was mostly Jewish and Portuguese. But because I went to a Jewish high school and required self-defense in the locker room, being an Anglican girl, I learned to speak fluent Yiddish. So when I came down here, I would get great deals on everything because the vendors would going, no, she's pretty smart for a shiksa, you know, but that's Yiddish for a Christian girl. But the market has really, really changed since then. I used to go down and play with the chickens in their cages and the pigeons in their cages and things like that. But I started coming down to Kensington because of the vibe and the people, listening to live music, being with people that care more about other people than what they do for a living or how much money they make or which private clubs their parents belong to. And I still kept going to the clubs. I mean, Kensington was the first place I was in a mosh pit, although I was a grandmother at the time. I'm not really your typical grandmother. I have been an advocate for gay and lesbian people for almost 50 years. A lead educator during the AIDS epidemic. I have volunteered in homeless shelters, including Out of the Cold and the St. Stephen's overnight. I have been a homeowner. I have been on the board of a co-op. I have been at the mercy of very many landlords. And the 5 years before I got to this building were really stressful and terrible. I was fighting aggressive, untreatable cancer. The government, which doesn't always communicate as well as they should, cut my OHIP because I canceled my driver's license because they told me I had 3 to 6 months to live. And I have lived in some real terrible slumlord places. The place I lived in before I got this apartment cost the same as this apartment. It was smaller than Ducky's. I had 6 square feet to walk around in. And I was privileged to listen to the nearby neighbor lady abuse her children all day and all night. Fortunately, well, it's not fortunately, it was only verbal abuse, because if she'd ever hit those kids, I would have kicked down the door and spent the rest of my life in jail. I did call a lot of agencies trying to get help for her. But ever since COVID, the agencies are swamped. The workers are burned out. It's really hard to get help for people that need it. And I was really giving up hope. And a good friend of mine said, don't give up. There's something happening in Kensington. And I said, what? She said, I can't tell you. What do you mean you can't tell me? She said, well, you're going to be moving. Yeah. Can you tell me where I'm going to be moving to? No, I can't tell you. And it was all because they had to wait for the closing. But on the day that I went to actually see the unit, when I left, I'm walking up Augusta and various friends of mine are going, hi neighbor, hi neighbor, hi neighbor. And they all knew where I was going to live. And I had only found out like 30 minutes ago, right? That's how tight this community is. So once I got back down here, I tried to continue my volunteering at St. Stephen's. Sadly, the body isn't up to it. So I wanted to see if I could get a position on the board to represent tenants, to help them with this fight. I can't tell you what a wonderful group the Land Trust is. I have been fighting for gay and lesbian rights, women's rights, children's rights, animal rights. I never fought for landowners' rights or landlords' rights, actually. And I have never met a more, they are just incredible people. The way they don't see people by color, by race, by religion, by income, by anything like that. I mean, they just care about people. And so I got this first apartment. The first 2 months I lived there, I kept looking over my shoulder at night going, oh my God, I hope the real tenant doesn't come home and throw me out, you know, because I couldn't believe that I was safe. I really couldn't. And so that's me. But if you're wondering why you should care about the Land Trust, please just listen for a minute and let me tell you. I was terrified to come and do this tonight. I mean, I used to give stage shows. I was at Woodstock. I've done all this stuff. But to talk to a bunch of people who are going to university and have graduated from university that are young with their lives ahead of them, and I didn't even finish high school, I thought, what can I tell them that they would like to hear? Well, the reason you should care about the land trust is they're starting with us. They're starting with some of the less expensive neighborhoods. But if anything in the history of the world and my life has taught me, it is that when they've got all of ours, they are going to come to yours. You might be upper middle class. They'll still want to buy your homes. And if you don't want to end up like a 74-year-old woman sleeping in a park, then you should support the land trust. You should start your own. We'd be glad to help you. I'm sure we had people that helped us. Take back our city, make it for the people. Landlords don't give you anything. They take your money, but they don't give anything to the city, really. They don't do anything. So take some control over your own life. And please, if you didn't take a break when she asked you to go to KMCLT and join the Kensington Market Community Land Trust, please do it now, because you will never, never regret it. I promise you. Thank you for listening to an old lady. And I'm so excited. So many of you young folks are here. I really think you can save the planet. And I'm really counting on you to do it. And if you don't, I'll have to come back and haunt you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sid. Also worth mentioning, there are different levels of support that you can give to the land trust. So even if you don't live in the Kensington Market area, you can still be a supporter member. And I think that's important for people to be aware of, okay? So that's all for our presentations. I don't see any questions in the chat. If people want to put questions in there, I will read them out. Someone's saying something about.
Sorry,
okay.
That's my fault. Click the photo under the button, become a member.
Yes. It should work if you click just below become a member on the Kensington Market Land Trust website. So if anyone would like to ask questions, perhaps you can do a reaction, and then I can find you and you can ask your question verbally if you would like, or put it in the chat. But I do see someone has said, okay, so we have a question in the chat about the building. The building has no elevator, and that addition would be an excessive cost. Are there any considerations about phasing in some affordable accessibility features in stairways, halls, bathrooms, etc., to accommodate disabled or injured residents?
Dominique, want me to?
Yeah, go ahead, Chiyi.
Yeah, this was a big theme when we got to know everybody that lived in the building. Actually, accessibility is a huge need, because actually quite a few folks in the building are also seniors. And so following our friends Parkdale's precedent, we definitely need to come up with a couple of different design options on how to assess the building, and how we would, there's a million other things besides accessibility that this building needs retrofitted. But we're really looking forward to doing a tenant-led or tenant-engaged process to decide what exactly we should do for the future of the building. I'm also going to jump ahead and answer. Oh, actually, Dominique, do you want to take the next question about vacant units?
Yeah, I was going to just add that the Land Trust is hoping that we will in the next few years acquire other buildings and have various types of buildings, and some may be more accessible than others. Are there vacant units available? Not at the moment, and we will likely have very stable tenants from their actions from our tenants. But as I say, we hope that we will be, acquiring other buildings and building as well. So eventually there will be. Do you want to take that, Chiyi?
Yes, so just to read these out, does the building essentially pay for itself? Is the next question I see here.
In a way, so I assume you mean, does it pay off the mortgage? And yeah, that's the only reason why we're charging rent, besides like also making sure that we're improving the building and making sure it'll be habitable in the years to come. So with what we call capital planning, or putting away money for major repairs like upgrading the ventilation system or fixing the brickwork, that kind of thing, along with the mortgage that we did take out on the building. Yeah, it essentially pays for itself. And that would be the core goal, is for the community to be able to sustain its own housing and not have anybody else need to take a cut from that.
Since there's a bit of a lull in questions, I will also just reiterate what Susanna Bunce has said in the chat, which is that we also are still accepting donations if you are able to, and that information is also on the website.
Sorry, another question.
Okay, is the maintenance and admin work all done by residents or volunteers? Oh, there's a number of questions coming up. So Amanda Stein, is the maintenance and admin work all done by residents or volunteers? So who would like to tackle that one?
Short, quick answer, we've engaged a property management company. So we hired a property manager, and then some of the admin work I do as well. I've stayed on as a paid organizer. And the board also continues to volunteer. So if you have capacity and want to join a committee, you can too.
Dominique, did you want to add to that, or shall we go on to the next question? Okay. Kelly Chan, are there any other CLTs in the works in the city country that you are aware of? There are lots.
So there are lots, and we are getting more and more organized. I'm excited, and I really about the neighborhood land trusts that are coming up in Toronto and the way that we are working together. So Parkdale has blazed a trail, and we have a debt of gratitude that we are really looking forward to passing on. We know that Chinatown's exploring the option of a land trust, and Little Jamaica, and we've been in touch with other groups that are looking at land trusts. So there's organizing that's going on, sort of neighborhood based. There's a citywide connection, and there is a sort of a national organization. So there are lots of different kinds of models of land trusts, happening across the country, and it's a really exciting moment, because I think it's with the success of, say, in Vancouver and other places of land trust, that particularly city governments are starting to see affordability as long term. I tell this story all the time, but I grew up in Heron Gate in Ottawa. It was an affordable housing community that was built with federal money I think I lived there in the 70s, and they blew up my house. They threw everyone else and blew up the house because it was bought and no longer affordable. So when we think about 50 years, that's nothing in the life of a city. That's nothing. So it's really exciting that land trusts have this view towards permanent affordability, and that's going to make a huge difference in Toronto and across Canada.
I think this also, I'll just tie this to Mark's question here further down. Is there a larger organization or movement of land trusts in Ontario or globally, which Dominique, you spoke to, and also Sue Bunce has put in the chat the link to the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts. So going up to a question from Kira, how did you connect with a realtor to keep on top of places for sale?
This is also a quick question. We ended up using the same realtor that Parkdale also engages, and they went through an extensive interview process with many realtors to find one that was values aligned and understood that real estate is just a game we're playing, but ultimately community ownership is the end goal. So we found a socialist among them, and they continue to work with us. So yeah, like paying that forward is also something we're happy to do.
Great. Erica, who's familiar to many from working in the market, says, I'm so excited to see this work happening. Is commercial space and art space part of your strategy?
So thanks, Erica, and thanks for helping us get set up. One of the amazing things and the sort of special things about this acquisition is that there is commercial space. Kensington Market, you know, part of its particularity is this housing above and commercial below in a non-grid sort of structure. And so the idea that commercial viability is also really important. Part of what makes Kensington an interesting neighborhood to live with is the vitality of the links between, you know, you go and you buy your groceries with the local person and they say, oh no, your husband came earlier and bought oranges already and you don't need to buy that. And so those personal links that happen with small businesses. And so it's really important that commercial viability and art space, you know, as we hope, as we need less revenue from things like the sign or the bank machine, you know, we will be able to offer some of those spaces to the arts community.
So a question just above, I know there's lots here and we'll get to them all, but I'm going to try and tie a few together. So is the Community Land Trust a different organization than the one owning the building? I think I can be confident in saying that no, they're the same organization. But then below, which I think we can add on to this, has the Kensington Market Community Land Trust become a registered charity to encourage people to donate?
So that's kind of it's not simple to become a charitable, a registered charity, and certain parts of our activities would not be allowed as a charitable organization. So we are in the process of looking at how we can best you know, get contributions, because clearly we're going to need the financial support. But whether that looks like community bonds or whether it looks like, you know, other types of, whether we become a registered charity or an organization, that's a complicated question that we're trying to unravel. I think Kevin is here, and maybe Kevin can better answer that question. My co-chair, Kevin Barrett.
Unless you were just asking to donate, and if there is if you need to talk about donations, email us separately.
Yeah, that too.
Okay, perhaps we can go to Tim's question about where are things at with the Bellevue parking lot.
So I can, I think that's one of our wins. We had a community visioning exercise to look at the Bellevue parking lot and see whether that could become something beyond a parking lot. And there was in the community visioning exercise, there was a sense that what we needed there was affordable housing, among other blue sky things like, you know, a park and a garden and art space. And But the city is now putting together a request for proposal that would offer up that sort of a request for proposal for what to do with that parking lot, and that included within that will be, you know, a community say in what happens there, and the affordability of whatever is built there. So we will obviously put in a proposal when that request for proposal comes through, but whether the land trust our land trust is chosen or not, there is a win in that we have, you know, dreamed that space into something that will be affordable and community led.
Great. Kevin, did you want to briefly speak about the charity status?
Sure. There's a lot of really interesting questions in the chat, but I just to underscore Dominique's, I mean, the question is quite timely, and it's a question we're wrestling with. But I would just underscore Dominique's point that it's quite difficult to get charitable status, and it's not. There's a lot of trade-offs, including this, the kind of restrictions that places on one's activity. The truth is that the kind of work that we as the Land Trust are hoping to do in the future does not entirely fall under Revenue Canada's definition of charitable work. You know, we own now a building that has commercial market rate commercial space. It's likely, if we're continuing to grow, that we'll own housing which is not at below market rates, but is market rate housing, which has a place in the market but isn't charitable. So we're wrestling with that, and we're trading that kind of direction off against trying to structure ourselves as an organization that can offer and accept various kinds of community investment, community bonds, things like that. And frankly, speaking personally, I'm more excited about those kind of innovative financing models. I think of this as a social change project. Charity doesn't create social change. But if we can create new kinds of structures that trap capital and resources in our community, then I think we're making some concrete social change. That's what excites me about what we're doing. So, thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. So let's go to a question from Mary Galinas, which is an interesting one. In Canada, do anchor institutions like universities always play a role in the creation of a CLT? Do communities need to make partnerships with universities first in order to be respected by municipalities in the creation of CLTs? I am thinking about cities other than Toronto.
I almost want to invite Sue to pipe up here. Oh, Dominique, did you want to jump in though?
No, I mean, the short answer is no. And the long answer, I think, is that we're extraordinarily lucky in having that partnership with an active partnership and a you know, a mutual partnership. So, but I'd love to hear Susanna on this point.
But it's a good idea. Universities as anchor institutions should be incubating this kind of social change work wherever they are.
I mean, I have to say that we've done various works with universities, and we've never had such an extraordinary partnership. I've never seen the kind of practical, you know, on time. It's been a wonderful, wonderful partnership, and I really can't say enough about how blessed we are by that.
Thanks, Dominique. And just to jump in quickly, Dominique, it's absolutely correct. There's not a precedent at all in terms of it being a need to happen before CLTs are formed. It just happened to be kind of synchronous in terms of the energies coming together at the same time, and in terms of the KMCLT and school cities. So I think in London, England, the case study I look at there is a example of Queen Mary University being involved in the very beginning. But again, it's the same kind of thing, seed funding, a bit of research, but really generative, and letting the community really lead the shaping of the CLT, not having the university impose itself in any way on the direction. And again, the School of Cities and Affordable Housing Challenge Project are here to support, not to direct in any sense of the the way. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks. So this next question from Jasmine, I'm wondering if this could be, if I could facilitate perhaps an email exchange, because Jasmine's asking about kind of what the most important starting points for getting the work done are. And Jasmine, I imagine you're thinking of a land trust that you're working on. So maybe it's actually best if we can connect you after this event, if you want to send me your email directly. Jessica Rapson, is there any risk of NIMBY groups adopting? So NIMBY is, for people who don't know, although I'm sure all the people on this chat are well aware, NIMBY means not in my backyard. So it is a way of characterizing groups that are not interested in having, let's say, social housing built close to where they live and often own homes. So is there any risk of NIMBY groups adopting and abusing the CLT system to prevent affordable housing or upzoning?
I can try and answer that. So I would say, don't lose sight that we're just calling this a community land trust. The model is, you also see real estate cooperatives, you also see, you know, all sorts of community governed entities that hold property and don't necessarily call themselves land trusts, like the family associations in Chinatown that used to run boarding and rooming houses for new immigrants. There are many strategies to do this work. And let's not forget that people who, very upper class folks, have always had access to the strategy that we know as a land conservatory, or, you know, consolidated land ownership is exactly what we are fighting against, and land assemblies by folks who are actively seeking to profit, either profit from it or turn them into like a private gated community or park. So absolutely, it's something that's alive and already like a sort of a well-known strategy by under a different name, if you were to think about it more expansively. So I don't think within the specific new emergence in the Canadian context, which is mostly rental housing led, and also mostly in the neighborhood model in downtown Toronto, which is also democratically controlled. In these two aspects, I think there are enough safeguards in how CLTs are constituted for groups to not be able to do a project that solely exists for the purpose of social exclusion as opposed to social inclusion. At bare minimum, I think the community land trust community would throw them out as outcasts.
Yeah, I mean, the principle of perpetual affordability, you know, is really important. And I think one aspect as well of the land trust is that, and it sort of comes to the next question, is, you know, within the movement, there is this sense of, it's not just, you know, sharing of what we own, but the sense that, you know, your neighborhood is small, and then you know, when you've accomplished what you've hoped to accomplish in your neighborhood, then you can't just sit there. The movement has to be, it has to grow. It has to, there has to be knowledge sharing and you know, a creation of a network, I think is it's really important. So there, you know, there could technically be a group, but I don't think they would call themselves a community land trust, and they wouldn't fit within the principles of a land trust. And to the question of whether there, you know, there's the national, there's a Canadian organization, a Toronto organization that's at work, and then there's broader international organizations that have been really helpful to us in terms of knowledge sharing. And I'm blanking on the name, but I went to a conference in San Francisco, learned a lot from activists in New York and San Francisco and other places.
Great. There was a question here from Mark Richardson. Are there any concerns that this land trust model is using government funds to cash out slumlord owners at market values and not generating any new affordable housing units? At best, it is a status quo program and not a growth program. If I may, I do think that what was emphasized here is, while it is true that you know, this acquisition was not, it's not a build from the ground up of multiple, you know, additional units, it is still mitigating against loss. and loss of affordable housing is extremely important. There is a lot of housing there is a lot of supply, and maybe Chiyi can speak to this point, but there is supply there, and a lot of the problem is that it's just not affordable. The units aren't affordable, and so retaining those that are in its way is, I would almost say that's counter the status quo, but I won't elaborate if either of you have more to say on that.
If I can, may I jump in on that just to say, thanks, Sinead. I think good answer. My answer to the first question, Mark's first question is, there's some concerns about that. It's just a really hard battle. Maintaining, let alone creating affordable housing in the late capitalist economy in which we operate is really, really challenging. But I would say a hard no to this last sentence. At best, it's a status quo program, not a growth program. I don't think that's true. I think at least it's better than status quo, because what we're doing is taking housing which at the moment was affordable and taking that out of a commercial market and ensuring that it's in community hands and it stays affordable in perpetuity. Those 12 units at 54 Kensington would not continue to be affordable if the land trust model hadn't taken them over. And the long-term dream of a land trust like ours is to build on those assets, to leverage those assets, to get more and more stock out of the market. It's a slow process, and it's a slow process working against the general direction of the economy, which operates at a dizzying rate to make housing less and less affordable. So I'm not going to deny that it's really hard, but I don't think it's at the very best just that. I think we actually have a much more hopeful vision of where this can go in the long term.
I also want to jump in and say, like, it's one of the only models that explicitly prioritizes the permanent holding of land. So it is a one-time transaction, and it is extremely frustrating that you are paying out these people who are behaving very badly prior to your acquisition, of course. But then here on after, that building will ideally never be sold again out of community use and for community benefit. And we have seen public housing units be sold to private hands. We have seen nonprofit housing units be sold to private hands. And the private and public are not the only two sources of housing. We're trying to make the point that there is a third way, and that is community-led acquisitions and community-led development. And so I also know that the person who asked the question, it is not like we're making, just in terms of their track record on the topic of housing, we don't have to just pick one of these strategies. We need to be negotiating the community benefits. We need to be doing this in the community space. We need the public sector to be building housing. We can't just rely on only negotiating with the private sector piece by piece for a smidgen of units for a limited period of time. And that is not going to get us anywhere. We can do all of these things at once together and advocate for them all at the same time.
So I'm conscious of our time here. I think we can get through a number of the other questions that are already in the chat. So Eric, there's a question directly for you from Emily, which is, what advice would you give to other groups of tenants facing renoviction or demoviction? And what are your tips for organizing and encouraging your neighbors to hold their ground?
The tell two friends and so on method. Start with your neighbors, because everyone knew someone else that would be able to help us, which eventually, met us up with organizations that gave a damn and could help us. And eventually that led to, being part of the genesis of the land trust here. So yeah, it's a great snowball ride once you can get started. And on top of that, hey, you get to know your neighbors a little better too and have a shared project. So yeah, I think that'd be my best advice, is network and solidarity.
Thanks. So we'll go to Jeremy's question. With so many apartments across the city at risk of being purchased by predatory investors, such as REITs, can you talk about your hopes and expectations for scaling up your strategy across the city? To what extent is the city's new MURA policy up to the challenge of supporting such initiatives. Jeremy, I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself, but if you are, maybe you could also just quickly describe what the city's new policy is there. But again, I'm not sure if you're able to do that. Maybe I can.
Oh, there we go. I've been allowed to unmute.
That work?
Yeah, actually, maybe I'll let, if it's okay. I think I actually spoke with Dominique about this. So I think she has a better handle on it than I do.
Great.
So the new Mura policy, I hope I'm able to describe it, is the idea that it comes in this sort of chicken and egg problem. So you've got a building, but you don't have money to even start that conversation, and so it builds on I wish I could remember the exact term, but that idea of preserving rooming house, so preserving affordable housing stock, but the need to move lightning quick in the market that we're in. So the idea is that that there would be organizations who are pre-approved and then are able to move quickly when a building comes up, so that there is funds there to do this initial amount of money, and then get in and start the due diligence period and those possibilities. Like, I feel that I feel this. There's clearly we're in a crisis, and more than landlords, I think it's really good to talk about these. I just imagine somebody in a building, somewhere, just with a Google map going, that one, I'm going to take that one, I'm going to take that one. And everyone who rents in the city is vulnerable to these faceless organizations. So my hopes and expectations is that we scale up. Yes, we need to scale up for our neighborhood, but to do it for, to pass on our expertise and other neighborhoods organizing in a similar way. And then the City of Toronto, is beginning with this Mura program and other programs, is beginning to understand that one of the ways that we can, preserve neighborhoods and preserve the affordability of neighborhoods, which is the character of neighborhoods and the people in neighborhoods. And I could go on and on about the waste of time of people having to fight for their homes. But so the city is beginning to understand that this can be solved in perpetuity, one building at a time. So I think it's an exciting moment, and we would look to a larger strategy across the city.
Okay, thanks. So the next question is from Teresa. Are financial institutions other than credit unions slowly warming up to the idea of financing land trusts?
Chiyi? Okay.
I've talked to a lot of people. We did prioritize talking to credit unions first, more as a principle from us, not as a rejection of big banking explicitly, but just that it would be nice to work with a cooperative banking partner. But we found that the familiarity with nonprofit housing models is actually not uniformly distributed even within the credit union sector. So I think the answer largely is no. It was very hard to first of all explain ourselves as an organization, and then that would take a couple of more meetings to get to the conversation, whereas I could just fast track that to, okay, let's talk about an actual loan. I will say that the mixed use nature of this building as a first in the community land trust context did affect our risk profile, I'm sure, when I was talking to different potential lenders. And I find that aspect of it really interesting, and I would love to digest it more and report back to everybody about and add that to the knowledge base of the community land trust model and how to do that. So if anybody is thinking about or is at that stage, please get in touch. We'd be happy to share our lessons learned.
And I'll just add that I'm sure banks are going to get there because this sector is going to grow. But Chiyi and I were in a 2-hour meeting today with some fairly senior staff from one of the big banks in Canada, and their lack of understanding of what we were trying to do was actually a little bit breathtaking to me. They they really found it hard to get their heads outside of pretty traditional housing financing models. I trust that's going to change, but to underscore Chiyi's point, the credit union sector is just more familiar with the nonprofit and co-op kind of model, and that gets us a foot in the door that has been very helpful for us so far.
On the topic of money, Jasmine asked, how do you find benefactors with big dollars to loan or donate? I guess they find you.
We have a fairly extraordinary situation in that, you know, people who love Kensington and have, you know, done well are willing to help, but maybe it's just before anything else, it's like, who are the neighbors that might be able to help?
Allison's question is about the building management. So how is the building being managed? How are decisions being made about maintenance or other day-to-day functions?
Collectively, we collectively decided on who to hire as a property manager. And now that we have tenants on board, there's a much faster communication channel between sort of what are the major concerns and how are we going to go about, you know, like talking to all the tenants about what maintenance needs to happen next, if anything that needs to be improved. So the accountability is a lot tighter now compared to, you know, the housing being owned by someone who's not in community. Yeah, I think that's broadly the answer, if anyone wants to add more.
So we might want to, I just see it's 9 p.m. And I'm not sure exactly about our timing, but we may want to wrap up soon. So I'll read this question from Andrew Dodds here, which may be our last question unless someone else wants to chime in. We don't want to see tenants who don't want to lose their homes or affordability suffer that loss. How do we encourage city politicians and policies to allow those willingly giving up their housing, i.e. market homeowners wanting to sell, becoming the locations that see new, denser housing created, rather than seeing that pressure placed near exclusively on tenants, like those of the CLT due to current city regulations? So the more pressure we can take off affordable stock, which currently seems to be the only housing stock we allow to see growth, to welcome immigration, refugees, and smaller households, the more time and fewer missed opportunities CLTs will face. I'm
not entirely sure what the question is, but I mean, it's interesting. In Kensington market is extraordinarily dense, and what we're seeing is more density. But you know, there's not just one thing that needs to happen. And part of the advocacy is sort of that missing middle of being able to, that there's an article recently about, you know, the exclusionary housing, that you can only have, you know, apartment buildings in certain parts of the city. And so I think that's part of the, you know, the strategy that needs to happen. But locally in our neighborhood, we're the really mixed and extraordinarily dense, not in terms of that housing being brought in. But I don't know if that answers the question.
We were just saying thank you for thank you. Like, we're just so excited by how many people wanted to hear about neighborhood organizing. It was really cool to see a Zoom room like this full.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's, you know, to so many of the questions, the answers is like, get to know your neighbors and organize. And, you know, organize not just with your immediate neighbors, but, you know, as I said, there's homeowners that, you know, that want to support and help. And sometimes we see these divisions where they aren't there. And the amount of, it's just getting to know your neighbors. You don't know who the neighbor is that's going to be key in making this happen. And there's so much excitement around land trusts right now. And so it's a beautiful moment. And we will we will be supporting you. And there's tracks being, every group that has success, that success is translated into a possibility for another group. So we really hope to build on all this.
Thanks everyone for being here.